Alright guys, tired of the inductics that just don't get you nowhere? I'm going to show you how to do a mod with the new beebrain board and the nano QX frame. As you can see, this is the propellers on the nano QX and motors, and the inductix motors, propellers. These things just do not get you nowhere. So I'm going to do a mod. I'm going to put this beebrain flight controller on the nano QX frame. Okay, in this first step, what we're going to do is, normally this board gets mounted just like this diagonally on the Inductix frame. Now, since this Nano QX can't accept it like that, we're going to mount this thing in a total different direction. I'm going to take this, turn it upside down, and notice the arrow. I'm going to mount this thing right here in the very front, and then I'm going to screw it down to these arms. Then we're going to run our wires. And now keep in mind, when we run these wires, you're going to have to do a little bit of soldering work because some motor wires has got to jump over to this side and some's got to jump over to the other side. It's going to be a weird configuration, but that is the only way to get this new beebrain flight controller on the Inductix, or I mean on the Blade Nano QX. I like it because the camera mounts right directly in the front, and you don't have to have it mounted on the top, which protects everything. And it'll accept a bigger propeller. Okay, what you got to do to drill this thing on is that you need a little hand drill or something small with a really small bit. Now, I only recommend putting 2 of these screws in because you start putting a whole bunch of screws all around that thing, it's going to eat up a lot of weight. And you can see how teeny tiny some of these little screws are. So we want to reduce as much weight as possible because everybody knows that every little ounce or gram adds up onto these things. So you're going to mount your flight board here on the front. Notice that the arrow that you got here, make sure that's going in the front, and then you're just going to rotate it a little bit, a few degrees. And I'll show you how to set it up and give you some information on Betaflight, how we're going to do this. You're just going to mount that up there. We're going to take our hand vise, and my hand drill, and then drill into this frame right in there so we can mount that screw out. We're just going to do one on each side just to slightly hold on to the board. Okay, now that you can see I've got the board mounted and the motors back in. Now I still got to change these old Inductix props to these bigger props that were on the Nano QX. Now we put the board in upside down and turned, and I've only put 2 screws on either side to reduce the weight. Because weight is everything on these little Nano QXs or the Inductix frame. And what you're going to have to do to get all these wires to fit, you're going to have to cut this wire. Now this wire here will probably go over here, and then that wire's got to go over there. There's a chain, so you got to note its rotation. So when you flip it around, you got to bring this wire all the way up and over to this other side just to get connection. Same thing for this one and all the way over to that side. They kind of cross each other because the board is flipped around. That's the only way I like it. And also, I like, because of the USB port on top, it's easier to get to, and then you can adjust the levelness when setting this up. Alright, we're back here in the workshop. What we're doing is soldering up these wires that I've made up. I found some extended wires off an old micro servo. What I've done is if this is the front, this wire here goes to that motor, and this wire goes to that motor, and that wire goes to this motor, and that wire goes to that motor. So anyway, they're the opposite, and you can see how I did that. I just extended the wires over. Now, when you're soldering up these wires, I've tried absolutely everything to make this thing as light as possible. I even thought about too much shrink wrap could add up. I don't know if that makes much of a difference, but there's not much there to short out. You can see I did one shrink wrap and just left one wire bare. There is nothing there going to short, but if anything, just to reduce absolutely the amount of weight that I can. And then you just continue soldering up the rest of these until everything's lined up. And then the next step we'll get into beta flight and clean up, or I'll show you how to orient the board so that it flies in the right direction. There it is, the beebrain on a Nano QX. It was a fairly simple put together. Just screwed it down to two of the legs. I didn't put four screws in it just to save weight on it. And the flight board's upside down. So I'll show you what I did here in beta flight here in a minute, so you can see how we set this up. Guys, we're going to talk about how we get the board oriented onto this Nano QX. If you notice, it's backwards and set off to the side. I like it mounted like this because then it's easily to get to, and then the plugs don't get in the way of the frame and everything else. So let's go to beta flight. Now, in beta flight, the very first thing you got to do is to get this board oriented. You need to go to configuration. You need to go down here and put this at 180 and 45. Do not try to calibrate it before you do this. You got to put this 180 and 45 and hit save. If the board is flipped over, it will try to correct itself. Then you've got an issue. Those angles won't work for it. So leaving the stock settings in a normal position, it should look right. First off, you got to set it at 180, 45, and then go to your setup. Then once that's in and you've saved it, then you can hit the calibration button and reset the axis. Then everything should be correct. Everything will work just like it's supposed to. So that's how you do it. You do not hit that calibration button with the board flipped over. It will try to correct itself, and then those numbers don't work. As far as my PID tunings, things are a little high. I got these numbers off from Mr. Steele. They seem to work really well. The only thing that I've done is detune the RCX or put some expo rate in it so that it ain't so sensitive. And my angle and horizon mode, they're all about the same, because it depends on where you're flying at. If you're flying inside in tight quarters, you probably want a lot more expo in it, because then you'll be running into walls and can't correct it fast enough, or it'd be reacting too fast for what you need to do. But that is my PID settings, and that's how I set my beebrain on a Nano QX. And that's all you got to do. This will beat anything from the Inductix. So I'll give you a little flight demonstration of how this well works. Flies nice and smooth. Flies super good. 20th throttle. And there you go. That is a Nano QX with a beebrain board on it. A lot better setup than that's nearly hands off, with a beebrain flight board on it.